Welcome back to another wonderful Artzenu. This week is a very special week as we are joined by our parents, grandparents, and many, many special guests. You know, I was wondering, what do you think Artzenu looked like when our grandparents were studying the land of Israel when they were in lower school? It's time for a new exploration back into history of our people. Let's see where we can go today. Recently, I had the privilege of celebrating a bar mitzvah of my child at the Kotel HaMa'aravi, a very special and inspirational experience. And while I was there, I was reminded of a story that took place many years earlier, right here on this very rooftop. My first trip to Israel, I was standing here on this rooftop with our tour guide and bus driver. He was a man in his 70s. And as we stood here on this beautiful rooftop, looking in the direction toward Yerushalayim, toward the Kotel itself, the driver walked up to a couple of us and said, "Isn't this a special place?" And I said,
"Yeah."
And he said, "Do you know what happened here?" And I said,
"No."
And he said, "I celebrated my bar mitzvah on this rooftop." I said, "Why?" He said, "Come, let's take a little tour back in history to my bar mitzvah in 1930.
This is my home, this is my motherland. This is the place where I want to be, a home no one can take away from me. This is my home, this is my chosen land. This is the place I live to defend, hoping to find someday, capture win. And this is my home, this is my promised land. This is the place where I want to be, a home no one can take away from me. This is my home, this is my only land. This is the place where I want to be, that will live on for all eternity. This is my
Driving the streets of Jerusalem today, there are many things to see that are much more modern. However, back in 1930, you might get stuck in a traffic jam with a horse and carriage, or a camel, maybe an old car, or a British police officer, or possibly even get stuck behind a flock of sheep running through the streets.
Salam, salam, aleinu ve'akol ha'olam. Salam, salam.
Well, you may not recognize where I'm standing. This here, this little area, is all the prayer space that there was at the ancient Kotel HaMa'aravi. This is it. You see, during this time period, the land of Israel, called Palestine, was under the rulership of the British. It was called the British Mandate. And the British government took over after the Ottomans left, and this became a Commonwealth of Britain. The goal of the British Mandate was to help the Jews develop a place for themselves to live. While that was the goal, it didn't necessarily work out so well for the Jews. And at the time of Yaakov, our bus driver's bar mitzvah, this particular little space was off limits because there had been some violence. In truth, even when it was on limits, shofar was not allowed here, chairs were not allowed here, tables were not allowed here. People could come by themselves and sit here on the floor and cry at the wall and pray like we do today, only with very little and under the guidance, the watchful eye of the British soldiers. And so on the morning of Yaakov's bar mitzvah, the Kotel itself was off limits, and in general was off limits to celebrations. This was the closest place to the kotel that Jews were allowed to go. And therefore, Yaakov's bar mitzvah in 1930 was celebrated here on this rooftop.
And so, while at the time period of the British Mandate, we had access to some of our holy places, could we imagine having to celebrate a bar mitzvah on a rooftop instead of at the kotel? Or being barred from davening at places that are ours in our Holy Land? This was not a way for the Jewish state to be. And finally, something very exciting happened. On the 5th day of Iyar in 1948.
מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.